Prepping inclusively for hardship mitigation. How to help loved ones before and after a calamity. Before calamity, you would want to take steps just for your own peace of mind and so that you feel like that you've done all that you could. There are things that you can do, but these are limited, in fact, compared to what the individual can do for themselves. It is not your responsibility to prepare and prep for everyone around you, especially if they have resources and capabilities as you do. Now, there are some people who are unemployed, that have physical disabilities, and they have other limitations that may not allow them to prep in the manner that you do. And if you do have those resources, after your own personal family, your nucleus family is taken care of, and maybe even some of your extended family, then you may want to put some things aside for those individuals. Before a disaster, you can do several things, and these are, of course, this is for individuals who can do things for themselves, which is the majority of people. Everybody can do almost something. There's always something that you can do to better yourself. And so things that you can kind of do before a disaster is to give the individuals prompts and your concerns and the rational, the rationale of why you have these concerns. That these are not all just made up, that you can give them examples, for example, from news stories, paper, clippings from the newspaper. You can do a lot of things. In terms of things on Christmas or holidays, whatever holidays and times that you celebrate and there are gifts given back and forth, it may even be a birthday, even though that could be a little bit awkward to give prepping supplies, but in my family it's not so unusual. In terms of of things you could give like kits. Small kits though probably would be a little bit more personal, and I don't know, they seem more complete than if you just gave them like 100 pounds of rice and beans. It just seems less personable. So you might want to consider maybe kits. It could be a comprehensive first aid kits. It could be, a variety of different kits, maybe a water filtration kit. But whatever it is that you think that they would need the most and that they're lacking. The next thing you can do before a disaster for your loved ones is to collect some information, literature. It could be books, it could be things on DVD. It would be most likely better to have things in a printed copy, so if there is no electricity, they can't refer back to it than that. So it's better to have things in a hard copy so they can look at it even if there is no electricity. And also, if their preacher promotes being prepared, have them link up with their preacher or anybody else that they look up to. And if they're really kind of one of those left-wing fanatics thinking that the government is their big brother and it takes care of them, then try to find the best and most beefed-up resources from the government showing that you need to prepare. Here in the United States, unfortunately, a lot of the websites only say to be prepared for 3 to 7 days. 7 days is if you're lucky, if you can even find those. So, what you'd want to do is find those resources and then add a few more things to it. The next thing you can do before a disaster is let them know ahead of time that you cannot help them in the hope that they will start prepping themselves. If you tell people, oh yeah, if you ever need anything, come on over, then you're just making it so that they have an out, and just another excuse why they can't help themselves. So even though you may actually help them and you may put things aside, we'll talk about here in a little bit when we talk about after the disaster. But before the disaster, though, you want to prompt them and to give them motivation to do their own prepping. And they may not do a lot of it, but at least they'll have a start and they'll have something. Sometimes when people get started in the prepping, they get what they call the prepping bug. And it's not always a bad thing. They just have to find balance in that. And so that they get kind of in a rhythm of gathering supplies and information and skills. So when you are doing this in the hope that they will start prepping, this is because maybe you don't want them to come to your home, or if they do come to your home, you want them to actually be able to bring something with them. And that's what you can also say, if you do invite them over, because maybe your parents live close by and you say, hey, if something really bad happens, come to my house. Maybe because your house is built stronger, or you have a basement and they don't have a basement, or whatever. So that's all cool. So in that situation, when you ask them, come over if there's an emergency, you also want them to be able to have resources. So you can say, hey, when you're on your way over here, grab your resources, right? Your kits and some of your equipment or gear or food, whatever, your rations may be, and bring it with you so that you're not just taking all of ours because we may have kids or whatever the situation is. It's a lot easier when you have kids that, you don't want to take food from them. So it makes a lot of other people more responsible in that kind of situation, at least, from what I've seen. So just tell them straight up, you can come to my house, but just bring your own resources. Just don't be, taking all of ours because we have people that are dependent on it. And this goes back to the whole idea that you can't carry the load for everyone. People do have to be responsible for themselves and their own family. And so you're lucky sometimes just to be able to prep for your own family, much less your neighbors' families, extended family, and so on and so forth. So there is a limitation. There is a point that you have to say no. Now, in terms of the last thing I would say before disaster is don't tell family and friends how much you prep, or even if you do prep. Just let them know that you're kind of mindful of these kind of things that happen in the world, and then you want them to be mindful, and that's about it. Because people talk. There's a lot of loose mouths out there, loose lips, if you will. And so it's not unheard of. I've heard this in my own circle of people, of parents or even aunts going, oh, little Sally Sue likes to be prepping. She's got all this stuff stashed over there, on so-and-so street. She's a nutwing, or she's a little crazy, or she's got some screws unloosed or whatever. And you never know who's listening in on that conversation or who she's even talking to. And if people get desperate enough, they might be thinking, oh, little Susie Sue or whatever down the street. I remember talking to her aunt. And she's got a bunch of stash there. And let's go over there and get some. And so that ain't going to work. Just keep your mouth shut and you cut out almost all of your problems. After all, we cause a lot of our problems anyways in our life. Now, after the disaster. Okay, this is where it gets kind of interesting, and you can do a leveled approach and a tiered approach, if you will. So you can definitely want to probably set aside some provisions for those who may show up. And then this is for people who are invited or uninvited. It's not that big of a deal if they're invited, especially if it's like your parents or maybe your brother or sister or an extended family member. Maybe they're elderly, or maybe it's your grandma or grandpa that really can't hardly take care of themselves. That's totally understandable. And hopefully you'd want to help them if you can. But if they're uninvited, you still may want to help them, though. This is the dilemma. And especially if you know them really well and you're like, holy crap, I can't just turn my best friend away. So in that kind of situation, even though you wish they had never showed up, you might have to just go ahead and help them if you can. So this is why you always put aside provisions that you may not even be accounted for, just extra backup provisions for people besides those that you would expect that would probably show up. So that's one idea. Of course, there's a limit of how much you can put aside. You may only be able to put aside a couple of days worth of extra provisions. Other people could put back maybe several months. So it depends on your resources. But whatever it is, though, you'd have to go ahead and say, especially if they're uninvited, you can say no, for one. But if you invite them in, or if they're already been pre-invited, you would have to tell them that there is a time frame. There is only a certain amount of time that I can have you here if you only have limited preps, for example. And so from the very beginning when they arrive there, you say, hey, I can only help you for 2 weeks, and that's it. Or the kids don't get fed from there on out, and I put them in jeopardy, so we can't do that. So after 2 weeks. Now what you do from that very beginning time frame when they arrive, you set up their rations and maybe even try to expand it as much as you possibly can. You may have to try to ration their rations, if you will. And so while you're doing this, though, you want to set up a contingency of where they're going to go next. Is there a local disaster shelter? Is there another family member or a friend that they know in the area that they can go to? So you definitely want to plan their egress and their route out. So they're not at the last moment, you're just kicking them out of your home. You don't want to do that. So from the very beginning, it's agreed upon that after a certain time period, they have to leave. Now, These plans could get a little bit sticky though, and that's why ahead of time it's good on your own time to look up where the shelters are, churches, and maybe even get to know some of their family members or wherever their other friends live, so that you can say, hey, I have a map that's drawn out with all the dots on here of where various resources of people and networks that you're already associated with, and here are some options, because they may not be thinking very clear. Now, this next one is really kind of cool. This is something you can do, is you can place provisions in other people's homes or dwellings, and you can do this covertly or openly, depending on the type of person. Some people are totally against you putting anything in their home if they know that you're trying to help them, because they feel like it's just charity and I don't take charity. Or they're a total denial about anything about disaster preparation. And they say, oh, nothing could ever happen to me. So if you say, here's some extra food and water, they would reject it. Now, in those kind of situations, you have to be a little sneaky, because they don't even know what's good for themselves. So in those situations, it could be even your own parents. You might have to say, hey, Mom and Dad, I know you have a big basement. And if I could just use a little bit of that storage in the bottom of the basement, because it's totally open. I have like 5 or 6 tote boxes. Can I just stack them a few inches off the floor? I got a small crate, and I just want to put them on that crate, and just put a few tote boxes, because I don't have enough storage at my house. Even though it's not even true, maybe you do have storage, but you're just getting an excuse to put things down there, so that they can actually put storage of supplies, survival gear, food, water, first aid, batteries, flashlights, crank radios, all that stuff. All the essentials we talk about all the time. And so when you do this, you can store that down there. And what you can do is, especially if there's kids that run around there, or if you're afraid that they might sneak in there or peek in there, that's up to you. If you want to hide a key, there's so many different ways to do this. And once again, it depends on the people, and you have to make this determination. But you could hide the key to the padlocks to these tote boxes, and during in a disaster, just hope that you can get a hold of these people and tell them where the key is to get provisions. I don't really particularly like that idea though, but some people do that. Number 2 would be not to lock have any padlocks at all. But once again, if there's kids running around and they might be getting into things, you might want to have some kind of lock on there. So you could have it non-locked if there's no kids, and just tell them straight up, there's some stuff down there that's helpful. If there's ever an emergency, go down there in those boxes, and that should be helpful. And just leave it at that. And especially if they're not like totally against someone trying to help them. And then the last thing is if you want to have padlocks on there, and you say, you can just tell them, in an emergency, take this key and go down there to those tote boxes, and then and check it out. And they might be curious and check it out anyways when you leave. But what you can do is just put the padlock keys, one on their backup key ring and one on their primary key ring. And so it's always there. It's not like it's a big deal, like you have to find it somewhere. And so you can go that route. Some people even do the envelope system. They put the key in the envelope, and they put it in the safety deposit box, or a strong box in their parents' or friends' home. And they say, hey, in an emergency, open this, and act like it's a letter or something, only to be open in an emergency, maybe even with your will or something. And they say, in an emergency, open this, and what you could have is the key to the padlocks down there. And you can go that route. It just depends on the people and the situation. It's very diverse. So basically, we want to keep these tote boxes in a more of a watertight seal containers, like tote boxes with those seals, possibly padlocked off the ground, at least 4 to 6 inches typically, in a basement that's cool and dark, maybe in some garages that are more temperature controlled, or in large, deep, like walk-in closets maybe. It's up to you about how you want to do that. Now, it could also, include cellars, wine cellars, of course, and just different types of, locations that may not have a lot of traffic. It's out of sight, out of mind. You definitely don't want these tote boxes to be stacked in the middle of a hallway, for example. Okay, so this does 2 things. It actually allows people that can't travel or that are landlocked, maybe your parents are in a situation that they can't travel because of the horrific disaster. It's just all the roads are just congested with debris because there was a very high level tornado or a hurricane, and so they're landlocked and they can't even travel. So this would be excellent for that reason, is they already have stuff stored there that they may or may not know about. They need to know eventually about it because they have to get access to it. One thing about, though, in disasters, when people get desperate, they do typically go through everything in their home. So if you just happen not to tell them, which is not really that advised at all, but if you did just kind of secretly put things in their home, they might be able to eventually find that just because they'll be so desperate. They may just be going through every box, even the ones that you brought in, and maybe exploring all their options. But once again, I think it'd be better to have them know up front. That'd just be really the most obvious choice, and say, hey, here's provisions. If you're just totally against it, then I'll take it back. Don't throw it out. But this is for your well-being. And most people would be understanding of that. The people who literally would reject that, then you've done everything you can, and I would have a clear conscience. I would be like, okay, I wouldn't feel bad at all. If something happened, and I would not wish any harm against them. But you've already offered that, that resource, and if someone rejects that, it's not on you. So that's their problem. Now, of course, so the first thing is that they can't get to your home. They have resources that way. And also, if you don't want them to come to your home, or if you want to delay them coming to your home, you give them resources so that they can kind of chew on that and use that up before they would even think about coming to your home. Now, if they are at your home, and the primary resources that you have set aside for these individuals, or even those people that were uninvited, but you still had some provision set aside, when that's depleted, and it's time for them to leave, because that was part of their condition of being there, that you can only stay for some time period, either be in days, weeks, or months. But whatever you have set aside before it starts eating into your primary personal stash for you and your kids, then you need to say, okay, it's time for you to leave, but you have a secondary stash for them in the form of maybe like a 72-hour bag. It could be a very basic bag, though. We're not talking about elaborate high-end gear or nothing. We're not talking about $200 fixed blade knives and top-of-the-line filtration devices, but we are talking about having some basic kits. They would probably cost you between $50 to $100 per kit. How many of those you make is up to you. Depends on who's there, who's invited, who may not be invited. It's very variable. So just look at the 10 C's of survival to help build this kit. Look at some of my videos, my bug out bag series. Even recently the video I did on the 10 essential critical categories of survival to reduce severe suffering and death. Look at those videos to get an idea of some of those items and those categories that are the most essential to help us in disasters. So giving everybody a bug out bag when they're going to their next location of refuge to resupply, to allow you to continue to survive and not to be completely drained and put you in a compromised position, so you and your family, especially your kids, won't have anything to eat. So you have to sometimes just draw lines in the sand. Now, when they leave, you also want to give them maps if possible, and all the options of where they can go. Of course, beforehand, it'd be good to listen to the radio and figure out where all the rallying points are. Maybe the Red Cross, for example, is just down the street, and you could even maybe walk down there with them and help them get set up in like a shelter or a refuge or a church. Maybe even a friend's house. Maybe they have a lot more resources than you do, and they can help out. Now, so in this situation, you can, besides even the bug out bag, you may want to give them a survival or a reference book so that they can actually kind of have, maybe something as a distraction from all this going on, books and stuff, but also just as an informative type of thing of how to deal with a crisis. So that's why it's so important to do research ahead of time for all this, in particular about what other kind of relief options are typically available in your area, besides your local, state, and federal, that may or may not be very functional. Sometimes they're not very good. Red Cross is pretty decent, but they're not always there in their first day or two. It can take as much as like 5 to 7 days sometimes, depending on the location, to even get set up. So you really would want to be mindful. If you're going to be expecting people, or if you really think that people are going to just show up at your door, you have to be realistic and probably say to yourself, you probably really do need a few weeks for each person that may be there. To add it to your family, or add it to your group that you're already a part of. So if you're if you and your family make up a number of 4 people, and you have 4 more people that end up joining you, maybe 2 of them are your parents and 2 of them is your brother and your sister, and so you have those 4 people, and you want to keep them there as long as possible, then you just have to be honest with yourself and see what are the typical disasters and emergencies that happen in your area. How long do they last? And do you have enough food for each of those people to weather that time period? And so, yes, there's going to be situations possibly that you cannot weather. It could be very, very serious stuff, nuclear wars, God forbid, and other types of things. But most emergencies don't last much more beyond 2 weeks, typically. For storm-related emergencies, relief typically gets in an area between 1 and 2 weeks. And even like the horrible hurricanes, it takes about 2 weeks before really aid is really getting stockpiled in that area. But in the meantime, you have to weather it yourself. And so I think personally a 2-week level is bare bones. And then I would shoot for a month to be on the safer side. If you have a lot of resources and if you personally are an intermediate or more advanced prepper and you feel like that you have a great stash, maybe you have a year's worth of everything already, and maybe you want to build that up for everyone else. Those other provisions, anywhere from 1 to 3 months, would probably be the most ideal, just to have that set aside. I mean, that would be an amazing ability and amazing gift to your friends and family and maybe even neighbors. That would be a gift of life if you had that set aside. And they would never forget that ever in your life, in their life. And that would be something that would be an amazing thing to do. But once again, you have to do it, and if you did that and everybody lives and everybody prospers afterwards, maybe and I would hope that they would take that to heart and maybe they would start at least prepping on some level. And that's what I've noticed. People who've lived through really rough times, they're never the same. And they always want to better themselves and their families so they don't ever have to go through that hardship ever again. I've had people that have never prepped in their life, but they had a horrific disaster in their life. A lot of them it was not even a storm system or anything. It wasn't even a natural disaster. It was like they lost their job. And because they lost their job, they ended up losing everything, even their home. And because of that, they learned so many lessons that they never, ever want to be that vulnerable again. Just like some people who've been in bad relationships. They felt so vulnerable at the end of that bad relationship that they never want to open themselves up that much with anybody else. Now, maybe that's not the best thing, though. Sometimes you can just have bad experiences in relationships. And sometimes bad things happen in your jobs, and you lose your job. Maybe it's not your fault. Maybe they just went out of business or poor management. But basically what happens in life is that things happen, good things and bad things. And sometimes they're unplanned. And so you have to learn from them, And just like in a relationship, if someone was abusive, you don't be with that same kind of person again. Just like in a job, if you were making a lot of money, but you were spending your entire paycheck every month and you never set anything aside for an emergency fund and you never bought any preps and you lived in your own fantasy world. Well, let me tell you, you will learn. And when you've gone through a hardship of losing everything, your BMW, your $200,000 home because you couldn't make the payment because you lost that job and you had zero savings and no money in the checking account, you will be like one of the most thrifty people that you ever would know. And I've seen this personally happen. And it's amazing how these people turn around. And it's so sad that they have to go through this to learn the lesson. All you have to do is listen to this channel and you've learned the lesson. Listen to the people in the comment section. Like 95% of them are excellent resources that have very good, wise words. There's wisdom to be shared here. And that's why this channel is so wonderful. And people are joining this channel left and right. Membership is up very high right now. And I just want to thank everyone and all the new members. Listen to those around and listen to the things on this channel. They're there to help you. This is not for me so much to just sit here and rant or chat or show you things. It's for you. This is all for you. And so I hope this information here about how to prep inclusively for hardship mitigation is helpful for you, how to help loved ones before and after calamity. And hopefully we'll all be better for it. Sometimes you have to think in the big picture to help the most people.